It's a spring evening in 1856 in the cramped top floor attic of a house on Cable Street in the East End of London, and an 18-year-old boy is about to fail. His name is William Perkin. He's a chemistry student. He's supposed to be enjoying his Easter break, and instead he's up here in a makeshift home laboratory trying to do something enormous. He's trying to cure malaria. His professor, a formidable German chemist named August Hoffmann, has thrown the whole college a challenge. Malaria is one of the great killers of the age, and the only real treatment is quinine, scraped from the bark of a South American tree, expensive and always in short supply. So the idea is simple, and the idea is completely wrong. Take coal tar, the black gunk left over from making gas for the street lamps, and out of that filth, somehow build quinine from scratch. Perkin mixes his chemicals. He oxidizes a compound called aniline with potassium dichromate. And what he gets is not medicine. What he gets is a beaker full of black sludge. A total, ordinary, unremarkable failure. Now, most 18-year-olds throw the sludge out and go to bed. Perkin reaches for a bottle of alcohol to clean the glass. And the instant the alcohol touches the black gunk, the whole beaker floods with color. Not brown, not gray. A deep, glowing, electric purple. So rich and so strange that Perkin just stops and stares at it. Here's the part he could not possibly have known. He was holding the future in a dirty beaker. That accidental purple would make him rich, it would launch an entire industry, and it would end up laying the chemical foundation for modern medicine itself. He set out to cure disease, he failed completely, and in failing, he stumbled onto a color that people had been killing each other over for 3,000 years. Because that's what purple is. Purple is not just a color. Purple is the color of gods and emperors and kings. It's a color you could be executed for wearing. It's a color that was, at its peak, worth more than its own weight in gold. Empires hoarded it, laws restricted it, and entire coastal cities were built on the grim industry of making it. And the maddening punchline, the thing I'll show you at the very end, is that the most fought over color in human history is a color that, strictly speaking, does not exist. But the story of purple does not begin in that London attic. It begins on a beach on the Eastern Mediterranean, more than 3,000 years ago, with a sea snail and a truly horrible smell. Picture the coast of what is now Lebanon, the ancient cities of Tyre and Sidon, home to a people called the Phoenicians. These were the great traders of the ancient world, the ones who gave us the alphabet, and at some point, more than 3,000 years ago, they figured out something nobody else had. They figured out that if you took a particular kind of predatory sea snail, a spiny little thing called murex, and you cracked it open at exactly the right spot, you could pull out a tiny gland, and the goo inside that gland, if you exposed it to sunlight and air, would slowly change color, from a pale, milky yellow to green, and finally to a deep, permanent, glorious purple. Now, the ancients loved a good origin myth, and this dye got a great one. As the legend goes, the hero Heracles, the one the Romans called Hercules, was walking along the beach with his dog when the dog bit into one of these snails. And when Heracles saw his dog's mouth stained a brilliant purple, he understood at once what he'd found. It's a lovely story. It is almost certainly not what happened. Nobody discovered this dye in a single dramatic moment on a beach. The truth is grimmer and far more impressive. Somebody, over years of patient, filthy, foul-smelling trial and error, worked out one of the most complicated chemical processes in the entire ancient world. And I mean foul-smelling. Let's be honest about how this dye got made, because this is the part the royal portraits leave out. To make it, you gathered snails by the thousands. You cracked their shells, you cut out the glands, and then you let them sit and rot and ferment in vats in the open sun for days. The stench was legendary. Ancient writers said you could smell the dye towns from far out at sea. The great luxury color of emperors, the color of divine authority, began its life as a reeking pit of decomposing shellfish that made whole neighborhoods unlivable. And if you think that's an exaggeration for effect, a modern chemist named Zvi Koren spent years painstakingly reconstructing the ancient method from scratch. And by his account, the smell is exactly as revolting today as it was for the Phoenicians. 3,000 years, and time has not improved it. And here's the number that explains everything else in this story. To make a single gram and a half of pure dye, roughly the weight of a couple of paper clips, you needed about 12,000 snails. 12,000. And no, that is not a figure of speech or a rounded up guess. Archaeologists have dug up the leftovers, and they found mountains of crushed murex shells, hills of them, millions upon millions of snails, piled outside the ancient dye works. The Phoenicians very nearly harvested the murex to extinction along their own coast. 12,000 snails. For a smear of color, you could hide under your thumbnail. So the dye was, by weight, worth more than silver, and at times 10 to 15 times more than gold. A pound of purple cloth could cost more than a skilled worker earned in years. And the moment something becomes that expensive, it stops being about color at all. It becomes about power. Because if only the richest people alive can afford to wear a certain color, then that color becomes a walking, glowing advertisement of exactly who you are, and more importantly, of who everyone else is not. The Romans understood this perfectly, and the Romans, being Romans, made it into law. In Rome, you did not simply wear purple because you liked it. Purple was rank. A senator was allowed a single purple stripe on his toga, and no more. A victorious general, celebrating a triumph through the streets of Rome, could wear a toga that was fully purple and shot through with gold thread, but only for that one day of glory. And over the centuries, the deepest, fullest purple robes narrowed down to a single man, the emperor. To wear the purple stopped meaning to put on a robe at all. It came to mean to take the throne itself. We even have the receipts. Around the year 301, the emperor Diocletian issued an edict trying to freeze prices across the empire, and it lists the cost of purple dyed silk. 1 pound of it was priced at 150,000 denarii. By that same document, that was the price of 3 Roman pounds of gold. For dyed cloth, and this was a color you were buried in. When the Emperor Charlemagne was laid in his tomb in the year 814, he was wrapped in a shroud woven of gold and Tyrian purple, sent from Constantinople. That's how total the association had become. You wore purple in life to prove what you were, and if you were important enough, you wore it into the grave to prove it one last time. And the laws had teeth. The rules around who could wear purple grew stricter, and the penalties grew harsher, until wearing the wrong purple could cost you not just your fortune, but, according to accounts of the later empire, your life. There are stories of emperors so jealous of the color that they had people arrested simply for selling it. Think about that. There was a point in human history when the wrong shade of fabric was, quite literally, a capital offense. People died over a color. When Rome faded and the center of the world shifted east to Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire, the obsession didn't fade with it. If anything, it got weirder and more beautiful. And we know exactly what happened when an outsider tried to get his hands on the color, because one of them wrote it all down in a fury. In the year 968, a Western bishop named Liutprand of Cremona arrived in Constantinople as an ambassador, sent to arrange a royal marriage. The trip went badly from the start, and it ended worse. On his way home, the emperor's officials searched his baggage and confiscated the purple cloth he had bought in the city's markets, informing him flatly that such fabric was forbidden to foreigners and belonged to the empire alone. Liutprand went home and wrote one of the most bitter, sarcastic, score-settling travel reports in the entire medieval record, and the stolen purple is right there in it. He never forgave them over cloth. And the Byzantines took the link between purple and royal blood and made it painfully, gorgeously literal. Deep inside the Great Palace of Constantinople, the emperors built a special room. Its walls were lined floor to ceiling with a rare purple stone called porphyry, quarried from a single mountain in Egypt. Purple stone, purple hangings, purple everything. And this room had exactly one purpose. It was the room where empresses gave birth. A child born to a reigning emperor, born inside that purple chamber, earned a title that marked them for life as the genuine article, the true heir, untouchable. That title was porphyrogenitos. It means, quite simply, born in the purple. And that phrase survived everything. It outlived the room, it outlived the palace, it outlived the entire empire. When you hear someone today described as born to the purple, born into privilege, born already at the top, you are speaking a phrase that was minted more than 1,000 years ago to describe a baby delivered in a literal purple room. One of those purple-born children, an emperor named Constantine VII, born around the year 905, was so proud of the title that he wrote it into his own name and left us detailed descriptions of the birth ritual. A color had become a bloodline. And this is the moment to say the thing out loud, because it's the spine of this whole story. Purple was never really about beauty. It was about the distance between the people who had power and the people who didn't. It was a wall you could see. And for 3,000 years, that wall was built out of rotting snails. If you're enjoying digging into the hidden machinery behind everyday things, do me a favor and subscribe, because the next turn in the story is where it gets genuinely dark, and then genuinely astonishing. Because here's the part that should make you a little sad. That ancient blood and snail purple, the color that had crowned emperors for 3,000 years, was about to simply blink out of existence. The end came slowly, and then all at once. In the year 1204, an army of crusaders sacked Constantinople itself and the imperial dye works. The whole delicate, secretive operation never fully recovered. The knowledge of how to make true Murex purple had always been a jealously guarded secret, passed down inside closed guilds, never written plainly, never shared. It was a trade secret protected across centuries. And secrets like that are fragile. They live in the hands and memories of a small number of people, and if those people scatter, or die, or are killed, the secret dies with them. Then came the final blow. On a Tuesday, the 29th of May, in the year 1453, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II took Constantinople for good, and the 1,000-year Byzantine Empire ceased to exist. In the chaos, the last of the imperial dye works went dark. The vats went cold. The guilds broke apart. And the recipe, the exact process that generations had guarded like treasure, was gone. Sit with that for a second. A color that had outlived the Roman Republic, outlived the Roman Empire, outlived Caesar, and 100 emperors after him. A color that had been worth more than gold since before the alphabet was finished. A color woven into the very language of power just quietly stopped being made. For the better part of the next 400 years, if you wanted true imperial purple, you could not have it at any price. Not because you weren't rich enough, because nobody alive knew how to make it anymore. The most valuable color in the history of the world had become a lost art, a legend, a stain on old fabric and old tombs that no living hand could reproduce. And that is exactly where things stood, until a bored, ambitious 18-year-old cleaned out a beaker in a London attic. Now you understand why Perkin's accident mattered so much. For 3,000 years, purple had meant scarcity. It meant snails and secrecy and death and a color reserved for a tiny handful of humans at the very top. And then this teenager, trying and failing to make malaria medicine, accidentally created a purple you could brew in a factory out of coal tar, cheaply, endlessly, in whatever quantity you liked. He was a sharp kid, and he knew what he had. Against the advice of nearly everyone, including his famous professor, he left his studies, and with his father's savings and his brother's help, he built a factory. He first tried calling his new color Tyrian purple, to borrow the ancient glamour, then settled on a prettier name, mauve, after a purple flower. And it went off like a bomb. Queen Victoria wore it. The Empress of France wore it. Within a couple of years, purple was so wildly, suddenly fashionable across Europe that a magazine joked the whole country had come down with a case of the mauvey measles. The color of emperors was now on the backs of shop clerks. The wall was coming down. But here's the part almost everyone gets wrong. Mauve itself was never the real prize. The real prize was the idea. Because Perkin had just proven that you could take coal tar, an industrial waste product, and pull brand new, brilliant, artificial colors out of it that had never existed anywhere in nature. And once chemists across Europe saw that, especially in Germany, they went hunting. Reds, blues, yellows, greens. A whole rainbow conjured out of factory sludge. An entire synthetic dye industry exploded into being almost overnight, and it made staggering fortunes. And those dye companies, those coal tar chemistry giants, needed armies of chemists and vast laboratories and deep knowledge of how to build complicated molecules from scratch. So when those very same companies started asking a new question, not what new color can we make, but what new medicine can we make, they already had everything they needed. The labs, the people, the methods. Some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies on Earth grew directly out of those 19th century dye works. The chemistry that gave us aspirin, and a great deal of what came after it, traces back in a real and traceable line to the hunt for artificial color. So think about what actually happened here. An 18-year-old tried to make medicine. He failed and made a purple dye instead. That dye launched an industry, and that industry, decades later, circled all the way back around and gave us medicine after all. They were not trying to build the modern drug industry. They were just trying to make a nicer purple. They built it anyway. And here's a little something to knock you sideways before we come home. Because Perkin wasn't even the first person to invent a synthetic purple. He was just the first to do it in a way that stuck on the other side of the world. More than 2,000 years before that London attic, ancient Chinese artisans had already cracked it. They took sand, copper, and a barium mineral and fired the mixture at blistering temperatures to create a synthetic purple pigment we now call Han purple. They painted it onto elite tombs and onto the famous terracotta army, that vast buried force of clay soldiers guarding China's first emperor. And then, when the Han Dynasty fell, around 1800 years ago, that recipe too was lost, and it stayed lost for nearly 2,000 years. But Han purple saved its strangest trick for us. When modern physicists got hold of it and cooled it down to near absolute zero under a powerful magnetic field, the pigment did something almost nobody expected. It appeared to shed a dimension. Its magnetic behavior stopped acting like the three-dimensional world we live in and started behaving as though it existed in only 2 dimensions. A color mixed by hand 2,500 years ago to decorate a dead emperor's tomb turns out to hold a genuine mystery about the structure of matter itself. The ancient artists had no idea. They were painting soldiers. So let's come back to now, to your world, where purple is everywhere and it is cheap. It's on a chocolate bar wrapper, it's a children's cartoon dinosaur. It's the medal a soldier receives for being wounded in service, the Purple Heart. It's the robe of a bishop in the solemn weeks before Easter. It was the color of one of the greatest albums ever recorded, a song and a film both called Purple Rain. The color that once cost 3 pounds of gold for a pound of cloth now costs a fraction of a penny, and you have almost certainly worn it or eaten something wrapped in it without a single thought. The wall that once separated emperors from everyone else got ground down into candy packaging. And now, at the very end, here's the twist I promised you. After all of it, the snails and the emperors and the death penalties and the lost recipes and the coal tar, here is the strangest fact about purple of all. Purple isn't real. I'll show you. Think of a rainbow and run through the colors. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Say the little school mnemonic in your head. Roy G. Biv. Now look at what's missing. There is no P. There is no purple in the rainbow, and there never has been. Every other color you can name lives at a specific wavelength of light. Red is a wavelength. Green is a wavelength. Even violet, which people mix up with purple constantly, is a genuine slice of the spectrum with its own wavelength, sitting right at the short end near blue. But purple has no wavelength. None. There is no single beam of light anywhere in the universe that is purple. Purple only happens when light from the 2 opposite ends of the spectrum, red and blue, hit your eye at the very same time. And your brain is handed a signal that makes no physical sense. Long wavelength and short wavelength at once, with nothing in between. And rather than leave that contradiction unresolved, your brain does something extraordinary. It invents a color to bridge the gap. It bends the two ends of the rainbow around into a loop and paints the seam a color that isn't actually out there in the light at all. That color is purple. It is quite literally a color your brain makes up. So the most valuable color in human history, the one that crowned emperors, the one people were executed for wearing, the one that took 12,000 snails a gram and an 18-year-old's lucky accident to conquer, the one woven into the phrase, "born to the purple," is a color that has never once existed anywhere outside a living mind. So let's retrace it. It began as a snail rotting in a Mediterranean vat. It became the private property of emperors. It became a birthright, a bloodline, a law you could die by. It vanished with a falling empire and was lost for 400 years. It came roaring back out of a teenager's failed medicine and dragged the modern pharmaceutical industry into the world behind it. It was invented all over again in ancient China, painted onto an army of clay, and forgotten for 2,000 years. And it now sits, harmless and cheap, on a candy wrapper in your kitchen. A snail, an emperor, an accident. For 3,000 years, humanity fought and paid and bled and legislated over the right to wear one specific color. We guarded it like treasure and built entire empires of status around it. And the whole time, that color was never sitting out there in the light, waiting to be captured. It was sitting inside our own heads. We spilled oceans of snails and centuries of effort chasing something that, in the most literal sense, we had already made up.